Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Grayzone. Had some technical issues here. My my computer that I use to stream decided to update, and it won't stop updating. So I'm on a backup right now, and I'm here with award-winning Canadian journalist Aaron Mate. We're now live on Rockfin. We're on Twitter. We should be on Rumble because YouTube demonetized our last stream. It age gated it. It's just demonetizing everything now. They're going crazy. And I'm hearing a lot from sources about pressure from wealthy pro-Israel lobbyists. Heavy pressure, unprecedented pressure on all these platforms, on universities. We know about that. So anyway, we'll find somewhere to stream from no matter what. And I also was checking in on Tony Blinken's State Department press briefing, which was delayed by 3.5 hours. So I did get to watch that in the meantime. Anyway, Aaron, how's it going?
Let me ask people how the sound is. If you can let us know in the chat, because we've been having some audio issues. So let us know if this is sounding okay, if there's an echo, if it's too loud. That would really help us out because we want to make sure that this is
I don't hear an
a
echo.
broadcast. I know, but I'm hearing different things in the chat. So let us know in the chat. It's good. Okay, good. All right. Hey everybody, thank you for joining us. We're in unprecedented times. I can't recall in my lifetime a situation as troubling as this. Obviously atrocities happen all the time, but right now we're dealing with an Israeli government that is openly flaunting its atrocities, including violating every supposed sacred red line when it comes to the laws of war, openly announcing the intent to bomb hospitals. And then when it does bomb hospitals, putting out demonstrably fake evidence, as it did the other day with that alleged audio intercept of two Palestinian militants that, by all accounts, is a complete fabrication. And you have the Biden administration applauding all of this, cheering all this on. Biden gives this unhinged speech last night. We're going to talk about. But Max, I can't recall a speech that demented in U.S. history. Maybe my memory is short, but somehow linking the proxy war in Ukraine to now backing Israel's massacres in Gaza and pretending as if he's on the side of human rights and having the gall to claim that he cares about Palestinians and speaking out against bigotry, which he encouraged openly by, for example, repeating the lie about beheaded Palestinian babies, which then was part of the climate that led to that gruesome murder of the 6-year-old Palestinian boy in Chicago. And then Biden goes out and pretends as if he cares about Palestinian lives. So anyway, we're going to get into all this, but
he says his name. He's like, his name was Wadia.
Yeah.
I thought it was important for me to watch Blinken's appearance at the State Department. It was supposed to be a briefing by Matthew Miller at 1, but then there was a release of 2 American hostages from Chicago. They were released by Hamas through negotiations with Qatar. Blinken wanted to announce that as kind of a diplomatic win, although the U.S. is doing everything possible to prevent the captives from being released. And then Blinken proceeded to repeat that everyone in Gaza are human shields. He was asked, is Israel actually obeying the laws of war, and that Israel, what separates Israel and the U.S. from barbarians like Hamas is that they believe in democracy and the rule of war. So just more green lighting of this a hideous blitzkrieg as Israel seems to be preparing some kind of ground invasion. There are some sources murmuring that the Biden administration is trying to delay a U.S. assault of the Gaza Strip. We heard Biden's speech that Aaron mentioned where he tied Ukraine to dead Israeli children, alluding to the beheaded babies that did not exist. I'll have a piece coming out on another source that's been manipulating Biden from within the Israeli prime minister's office. It's a very interesting one, who fed him those photos that didn't exist. And so Biden is basically telling the Republicans in the Freedom Caucus and Senate Republicans like J.D. Vance, who've opposed Ukraine aid, that if you don't send Zelensky your billions, you are an anti-Semite terror simp. That's basically the message. And we'll go through Biden's speech later. I think it's important to get some updates from the ground, Aaron. We have Israel basically telling people to leave the largest hospital, or one of the largest hospitals in Gaza City, Al-Quds Hospital. This is an urgent appeal from the Palestinian Red Crescent Society. Palestinian Red Crescent Society faces an imminent threat. The Israeli occupation forces demand the evacuation of Al-Quds. There are 12,000 displaced civilians inside. They're calling on the international community to avert another catastrophe like the one at Al-Ahli Hospital, where anywhere from 100 to 500 civilians were killed in a strike that Biden blamed on Palestinian armed factions. And here is what it looks like inside Al-Quds Hospital today. These are some of the 12,000 there. And basically, Israel is going to send them out into the street. Many of them have already had their homes destroyed. Send them to nowhere, where they will then be bombed again with its forces poised to enter, which everyone agrees will be a complete bloodbath. We've seen several of our contacts have their homes bombed, have their neighbors killed in the past 48 hours. I also received from a source in Gaza a message that's being sent out to UNRWA from the Israeli army. So UNRWA is the UN relief works agency that maintains the schools in the Gaza Strip. They are responsible for the welfare of over 70% of people in Gaza who are refugees. Sorry, they were set up in 1948 or 1950 to care for Palestinian refugees. And here is the message sent to their schools, in which thousands of civilians are sheltering. You are ordered to leave 5 schools inside Gaza City. Residents of Gaza City and all its neighborhoods, the Israeli army has pleaded with you several times to evacuate to the south of the Gaza Strip, including the shelters and schools. And you have not done so. To all people staying in at the northern Rimal area, especially those in the following schools, they are told to leave.
And Max, you were in Gaza during the 2014 Israeli assault. How vital were these schools, these UNRWA schools, in sheltering people, protecting them from Israeli bombardment?
Well, it was a scandal that Israel began bombing those schools during its operation. And what I understood is just a larger point about Gaza and how the Israeli military operates. You can't understand the scale of destruction unless you're inside, and you just drive and see kilometer after kilometer of decimation. And 2014 is everyone thought that was shocking, but now what we're seeing is on an entirely different scale, where something like 600 children were killed in the entire 51-day assault on Gaza in 2014. Now the number is, I think it's edging past 1,500 in just over 10 or 12 days. So Israel has the entire population registry of the Gaza Strip in its possession, including where people live. It also has a vast informant network that it gathers through manipulation, blackmail, and the incentivizing work permits. And it asks people to snitch on their neighbors. Who's with Hamas? Anyone who it considers a Hamas family is someone who might have a member of the largest political faction in the Gaza Strip in its home. And that could be someone who's working a managerial position in one of the ministries, even the health ministry. It's not necessarily an Al-Qassam fighter. And then they will target that entire home based on the presence of someone who has some affiliation with Hamas there. And then they just target homes of people who have no affiliation with Hamas, like in 2014 at the end of the assault. In one final blow, they took down the Zafar 1 tower, which was mostly Fatah supporters and former employees of the Palestinian Authority who opposed Hamas. And it's just basically a way of saying, well, you didn't rise up against them, so you're targets too. My point is, all these homes, when you see them being struck and they're saying we're hitting Hamas targets, they're hitting entire families. They know it. They're down with it. And it's because somebody has a political affiliation they don't like. This is what the Israeli sociologist Baruch Kimmerling called politicide. So that's how we should see what's going on. But now what they're doing is they're evacuating the entire northern area of the Gaza Strip. The Jabalia refugee camp, which is the first refugee camp in the north, has been obliterated. And below it is Gaza City. And you have the Al Rimal area, which is the central area in Gaza City with a lot of administrative offices, as well as cafes and cultural attractions. It's obliterated. And that's where Israel plans to send its ground forces in. They have announced a 3-prong operation, or a 3-level operation. One is to eliminate the military and capacity of Hamas, and then to eliminate its leadership and politically destroy it. And then 3, to replace it with some kind of entity. Do you think Abbas is going to come in on the back of an Israeli tank? I mean, as bad as what he's already done, I don't think he's going to go that far. So who's going to replace them? No one can say. They don't actually have a plan. I think, if anything, if it's Gaza's just left in ruins, a Islamic State-like entity will fill the void, and Israel will be completely fine with that, because Islamic State didn't fight them in Syria. In many ways, supported by them. So catastrophe is on the horizon in the coming hours. I mean, we're already seeing catastrophe, but we're talking about the destruction, the deliberate destruction of hospitals. And we've also seen the oldest church in Gaza City attacked. I mean, is this a Hamas target? Is it a Hamas target to attack an Orthodox Church, which has been in this area since 425 AD? Funeral service for those who are sheltered inside who were killed. Also north of Gaza City, where Israel's striking. These are Orthodox priests, Orthodox clergy. This is footage shot by Hind Khodari, who's one of the brave Gaza journalists operating there. We've interviewed her before. I mean, these are people who have no affiliation with Hamas. This is a baby that was killed. But Hamas, they say they're the Islamic State. The Islamic State did not allow Christians to exist within its midst. The St. Porphyrius Church under the Islamic State, which was supported by the US and Israel, it would not have stood under an Islamic State-like entity. And now we see the Jewish state in Israel and the Levant, the self-proclaimed Jewish state, destroy it and declare religious war. And where are the Christian Zionists? Where's John Hagee? They don't even see them as Christians, these born-again, rapture-ready maniacs. They don't see Palestinian Christians as Christians, apparently. These are people who are descended directly from the disciples, but they're not born again in the blood of Christ, so they don't see them as Christians. The conservative incorporated bloviators who've been celebrating this attack, pleasuring themselves in the blood of Palestinian babies on their little podcasts, they have no problem with this, the striking of one of the oldest Christian churches on the planet. Why? Because they're Arabs. I mean, what else? What other reason could there be?
Yeah, it's just pure racism. It's just pure racism. And remember that in recent years, evangelical Christians have become Israel's basically #1 base of support, because younger generations of Jews in the U.S. have been increasingly horrified by what Israel has done, which leaves hardcore evangelicals who one day want to see all Jews sacrificed anyway when Christ returns, and then the older standard Israel lobby that can always be counted on to defend Israeli atrocities. That's basically Israel's coalition right now in the U.S., and that's who's in charge. Even though it's amazing, Biden's proceeding with this plan to arm Israel, even as polls consistently show that the public is not with him. So this is from Data for Progress. Voters across party lines agree that the U.S. should call for a ceasefire and de-escalation of violence in Gaza. Biden, so committed to the Israeli project, the Israeli atrocities, enabling Israeli massacres, proceeding full ahead with this request to Congress for tens of billions of dollars. I think the final price tag is over $100 billion. Most of that for Ukraine, but also at least $10 billion for Israel. And that's just the beginning. He's going to ask for more. This is only his first request.
Yeah. So that's amazing given the level of propaganda that Americans are being subjected to on this, and it shows the complete collapse of trust in legacy media, which has been functioning. You look at CNN, Fox News, to a slightly lesser extent, MSNBC, which has had Palestinian guests on. The New York Times op-ed section, the editorial board declared that Israel is demonstrating its support, its humanity with its assault on Gaza. The legacy media, so many people have abandoned them. Even the Democratic Party base, Gen Z, from Gen X down to Gen Z. And that's, encouraging. It's sort of paradoxical that the Republican base has abandoned U.S. policy or turned against U.S. policy on Ukraine. And so Biden's speech was obviously meant to bridge the gap between those two bases, his own and the base of Trump.
Well, from my interactions with some of these right-wing figures, they're so passionately committed to defending Israel and its atrocities and so blinded by racist contempt for Palestinians that I think they're going to, most of them at least, from what I can tell, are going to drop whatever limited opposition they had to the Ukraine proxy war, because they seem so convinced that Israel needs to wipe out Gaza. They're cheerleading it. Whitewashing all these atrocities, all these videos. Like, you could spend all day just watching videos of Palestinian infants being massacred, their parents coming and relatives coming across their bodies, and none of that makes a dent in these people. And it makes sense. It makes perfect sense that Biden will try to tie these two conflicts together, because to the extent there's parallels, we're in Ukraine and Israel, we're talking about ultra-nationalist regimes. We're talking about situations where the U.S. to date has blocked all the peaceful options that were on the table, that were supported by the international community. And we're talking about blind chauvinism that's devoted to just wiping out your enemy and not living in the same place with them. In the case of the Ukrainian neo-Nazis that the U.S. supports, they don't want to have any, even like a blot of Russian culture inside their country, even though that's the identity of millions of people inside their country. When it comes to Israel, it's just open policy. They're Jewish supremacists. That's the term of B'Tselem, the Israeli human rights group. It's a Jewish supremacist regime, and they cannot tolerate the presence of the indigenous Palestinians, so they have to be wiped out.
Yeah, we're sending billions and billions of dollars to a hyper-militarized ethno-supremacist state led by a Jewish guy. Is it Ukraine or Israel?
Yeah.
I can't tell.
Yeah.
These conservatives, the racist language is just flowing freely. What's that guy, Dan Bungalow, who's on Rumble?
Mangino. Yeah.
Mangino, what's his name? Whatever. This Goomba calls Palestinians savages like every day. Just the savages. That's what he refers to them as. And then, you challenged him on that. And he did this like this long rant basically denouncing you because you'd been so good on Russiagate. But then suddenly he realizes, then he's like, he's with this terror simp website, the Grayzone.
He accused Rashida Tlaib of trying to ignite a religious war inside the U.S. He literally said that because she's calling for a ceasefire. And meanwhile, you have Lindsey Graham openly saying this is a religious war.
This is a religious war.
Yeah. So his own side is saying this is a religious war, and because Rashida Tlaib is calling for a ceasefire, somehow she's responsible for trying to ignite a religious war. But again,
these frauds, these conservative incorporated frauds, they just can't understand how someone like you could be consistent as an anti-war.
They can't, no.
As an anti-war American, they can't understand. They're like, I thought he was good because he was on Trump's side against Russiagate, but he's not because he's a terror simp.
Yeah.
He's with the savages. It's like they just believe. So, of course, they literally believe in nothing. The Democrats basically believe in nothing. They're the elected Democrats. They're probably going to be a little more sympathetic to Palestinians on this. And they like to see Palestinians as pure victims. But Bernie Sanders has been horrible on this. They basically believe in nothing also. And the best thing you can do is form tactical alliances with them on the issues where they're good for purely partisan reasons, like Marjorie Taylor Greene or whoever. But, much of the anti-war left doesn't even want to do that. And so, you're pretty much left with no one. It's been a moment to really showcase the hopelessness of congressional and electoral politics. I guess since we're on this topic, we might as well see what Bernie had to say when he came forward, the voice of moral clarity, who sat there with his mittens on as Biden was elected, his mittens and his mask. And here he is, Matt Duss's puppet.
The mowing down by machine guns of young people who were doing nothing more than attending a dance, the murder of babies. This is an horrific act precipitating a worldwide crisis. And the United States of America, all of us, condemn this act. And in my view, the state of Israel has the absolute right to defend itself against Hamas and terrorism in general. No debate on that.
No debate. Yeah, there's no debate because of you. You're not debating it. And there's no one else left to debate it except Rashida Tlaib, who happens to be Palestinian.
If the terrorism that Israel experiences comes from the fact that it's been occupying millions of people for more than 50 years, does Israel have the right to defend itself against that terrorism, or does it have the obligation to end the occupation, which is a form of terrorism in itself? And in fact, you can't even compare the terrorism that Hamas was responsible for to the terrorism that Israel was responsible for. And again, it's not morally equivalent because Hamas's terrorism is a response to a criminal occupation and a siege, whereas Israel is the inciting party by occupying and committing state terror, not just in one day, as we saw with Hamas, but over 50 years. And unless you can have that, unless you can recognize that there's no parity between an occupied people and an occupier, you shouldn't be able to speak on this conflict. It's better just to say nothing. And Bernie, I think, I'm sure he threw in that speech some nods to Gaza's humanitarian situation, which of course few other people in Congress will do. So good for him. But you can't understand this conflict if you adopt any kind of parity between the two sides, because it's very simple. There's an occupier and an occupied population.
Yeah, it's as though history started on October 7th, 2023. It's as though 750,000 Palestinians were not ethnically cleansed between 1947 and 1948, with over 200 villages already destroyed by the time Israel declared its quote-unquote independence in May 1948. It's as if Israel didn't massacre hundreds of Palestinians at Kfar Qassem in 1956 under a curfew, who were Palestinian farmers who were simply returning home from their fields. It's as if Israel didn't massacre 300 people in the Gaza Strip in 1956 during its assault on Egypt, lining men up against the wall and killing them for no reason other than the fact that they were Palestinians. It's as if Israel didn't wipe out 3 villages, Beit Nuba, Yalu, and Imwas in Palestine in 1967, driving hundreds of their residents at gunpoint to Ramallah after Israel initiated a 2-pronged war against Egypt and Syria. It's as if Israel didn't kill thousands and thousands of Egyptian civilians during the war on attrition, during terror attacks, including bombing Egyptian oil facilities. It's as if Israel didn't kill tens of thousands of Lebanese people during its illegal invasion of Lebanon and then occupy Lebanon in a bid to extend Israel's illegal territory all the way up to the Litani River, only being driven out by the armed resistance of Hezbollah in 2000. It's as if Israel didn't carry out Operation Grapes of Wrath and destroy an entire town and UN facility where civilians were sheltering under orders from Telly Bennett, who is now a top Israeli political figure. It's as though they didn't kill thousands and thousands of Palestinians and destroy the Jenin refugee camp in 2002, as though they didn't blanket Lebanon with high-powered U.S. bombs and JDAMs, and in 2006, destroying half of Beirut, the entire Dahia neighborhood, and much of southern Lebanon. And then they waged 5 military operations on the Gaza Strip after declaring their so-called withdrawal, placing Gaza under siege in 2007, literally counting the calories each resident was entitled to. I mean, all of this history was erased. Tens and tens of thousands of dead, countless atrocities and indignities experienced, and hundreds of Palestinians had been killed in the West Bank already this year.
Yeah.
But a history, according to Bernie Sanders and everyone on Capitol Hill, began on October 7th. And the Gaza Strip wasn't under siege. It was just a regular country that was just sitting there, and they went into Israel just to kill Jews because they like killing Jews. That's the history lesson that we're getting from the best and brightest in the U.S. government, including the self-described democratic socialist Bernie Sanders. And I think those of you who know history, who believe in facts, and actually also believe in humanism and empathy, should break from these figures, because they're not only creating space for one of the worst atrocities of our time, they're making us stupid. And that offends me a lot. That's part of what offended me about Zionism in general when I would encounter all the indoctrination is you're just lying to me and I'm not stupid, and Jews are not supposed to be stupid. Zionism's trying to make Jews into stupid people who support mass killing. And
chauvinists and supremacists who literally believe in, that we're exceptional, we're the chosen people, all that chauvinistic rhetoric that we get as Jews growing up. And it's sick. And it undermines, on top of one's, basic humanity, it undermines so much what is great about Judaism is critical thinking. There's so many critical thinkers that have come out of, Jewish culture, and all this is geared towards undermining that. There's some article in the New York Times out today that says that progressive Jews feel let down by their left-wing allies. Well, what progressive Jew, who actually takes progressive values seriously, could feel somehow that it's an attack on them that people are outraged over the mass murder of children, the bombing of homes, this ethnic cleansing in their name, and yet they feel let down by left-wing people who are opposed to that.
You're letting me down. Sarah Silverman is so upset. She's not going to make potty mouth jokes anymore. And if you keep supporting the Hamas, like who are they? How are they progressive? Because they support abortion or something? They support abortion rights for American women and post-birth abortions for all Palestinians. Sarah Silverman's sister, Susan Silverman, is a rabbi who lives in a stolen Arab home in the Baqa neighborhood of Jerusalem, which was Arab before it was ethnically cleansed in 1948, just for some context there. But I don't know who these progressive Jews really are, what makes them progressive. They want to progressively move Palestinians into the Sinai desert, which is actually the plan. I mean, that as laid out by Danny Ayalon, former Israeli foreign ministry official. But I guess since we're bringing up progressive Jews, like actual progressive Jews, we might as well turn to some of these protests that have really, I think, shaken the world, to see thousands of Jews inside the U.S. calling for a ceasefire and protesting Israeli apartheid. This was a protest held last Wednesday by Jewish Voice for Peace. And, I've been around Jewish Voice for Peace. They definitely speak for me on this issue. I might not have a lot in common with their leadership on other things, but they speak for me on this issue. And they've organized Jews in America to be able to voice their conscience on Israel and Zionism. And they are an officially anti-Zionist group that supports the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. And they held the largest protest of Jews against Israeli apartheid ever inside the U.S. Capitol on Wednesday.
That was a beautiful sight. I'm really thankful to everybody who was there for acting on behalf of humanity, and especially on behalf of Jews who refuse to let this murderous Nazi-like government act in our name. And that was a beautiful sight. And I hope stuff like this will continue. It's incredible to me that people still haven't woken up. I mean, we've so many years now to learn the actual facts about Israel, Palestine. It's available for anyone with their eyes minimally open. But a lot of people still choose to not see it. And it's unbelievable that even now in this moment, some people still stand by and are either silent or support this. But it's good that there are people putting themselves on the line, like Jewish Voice for Peace.
Well, I'll tell you, in Chicago, Rabbi Brant Rosen, I spoke at Yom Kippur services there in 2015 about Gaza, and there were hundreds of Jews. They actually didn't have a synagogue. It was sort of like a charter school, how they don't have space, so they need to like occupy space elsewhere. So they basically rented a church to hold Jewish services in. And, getting to know the people that are around Jewish Voice for Peace. These are people who are serious about Judaism and serious about Jewish culture. And it's difficult in the U.S. to not assimilate. And so one of the things that American Jews have done is take the easy route. It's like, you're not that serious about being Jewish. You're struggling with your identity in a multicultural environment. What's the easiest thing to do? Well, there's one pillar of identity that you can easily identify with, and it's just Israel. Go on Birthright and, go volunteer and, give food to Israeli soldiers. And that's all you have to do. And then you can call everyone else a self-hating Jew or an anti-Semite if they won't go along with this sectarian apartheid state's agenda. And this is falling apart, this concept of Jewish identity. I mean, it's completely falling apart in the United States. And only people who are extremely vulnerable in their identities and are extremely narcissistic, people like Ben Shapiro, are adhering to it without question. I mean, even within liberal mainstream synagogues, it's breaking apart. When I went to Yom Kippur services this year, I just went into some mainstream synagogue in Georgetown. I don't belong to a temple because they're all Zionist in DC. But I'll still go in and do my thing. And I came in the middle of a sermon, and it was a rabbi who was I knew him as a pro-Israel rabbi. I think he's like the rabbi for the Hillel House at Georgetown University. And he was denouncing the Israeli government as fascist. This was before any of this happened. And he's saying they are fascist and you must go out and protest them. Of course, he was saying, go out and protest them for Israel, but because they're destroying Israel. But I mean, it's still significant to see that. So we have that. And then on the world stage, Israel is losing whatever support it might have had, any popular support it might have had. Its support is completely among elites, and it seeks a peace between elites and a peace among the rich. That's what like its normalization with Saudi Arabia is about. So this is at the Rafah border right now, the Rafah crossing, where there are 20 aid trucks being held up by Israel to prevent them from getting in to 2 million people who have no water, no electricity, no fuel, because Israel has cut it off. Women inside the Gaza Strip are now taking pills to prevent themselves from having periods, because that which are available, because there are no tampons or maxi pads available and they can't take showers. That's just a slight illustration of the humanitarian catastrophe that's unfolding. So Egyptians have come out to protest with the permission of their military junta led by Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, who has been a loyal tool of Israel, and has participated in the siege of Gaza. This is highly significant. They're pushing towards the border gate. Remember, Egypt has been an active participant in the siege, thanks to the Camp David Accords, which eliminated Egypt as a resistance state.
And that figure you mentioned, 20 trucks for 2 million people.
Yeah.
20 trucks and this is what Biden was bragging about.
Yeah.
That he got Bibi to agree. Wow. How nice of him to let in 20 trucks for 2 million people. It's unfathomable what a joke this is. I mean, 20 trucks for 2 million people who are starving, who lack water, who lack medicine, who lack everything. And then Biden wants to paint some kind of accomplishment that he gets Israel to agree to 20 trucks. And you're saying that Israel hasn't even allowed that pittance, that less than a pittance, to even come in yet.
No, Antonio Guterres, the UN General Secretary, has gone to the Rafah border and demanded that those trucks be let in, and he too is being ignored. Israel is going as far as it wants with total diplomatic cover from the US, while Biden has claimed that those trucks are going to be allowed in. But Israel's like, well, we're going to bomb them. We will bomb. And they've been bombing. They've bombed twice the Rafah crossing already. Yeah, what if 20 trucks for 2 million people in desperate misery who are relying on whatever stores of water they have, like water bottles and so forth. We don't even know how many people are dying of deprivation. And as the ministries, the health ministry of Gaza comes under attack and hospitals are evacuated and attacked, there will be less and less documentation. And I personally hold responsible not only the Biden administration for this catastrophe, which has been going on for decades, especially since the 2007 siege of Gaza, but I hold the US media responsible. The US corporate media is certainly an enemy of the Palestinian people. And they've started to parachute these CNN reporters into areas where people recognize that as well, because they've suddenly left their little base in Israel. CNN had sent basically all its anchors to Tel Aviv and Ashkelon. And now they've sent Clarissa Ward, the biggest regime change propagandist, CIA adjacent correspondent, who said that she was once having a seizure because she saw a picture of me in Damascus and then blocked me. She said she was literally shaking. I'm literally shaking. And she parachutes into Rafah, and she finally gets held accountable by an Egyptian podcaster named Ramzy.
Say the truth, we understand you're an employee. You're just a puppet. You're just a mouthpiece.
You're just a puppet. You're just a mouthpiece.
Don't talk to me like that. Thank you. I understand you have your foreign policy. No, I've heard you. I've heard you. You hear me. I understand you have your foreign policy. I understand you speak for your government. I understand you represent your government. But that being said, you're a country that's claimed free speech. Your customized democracy is actually what led to Hamas. And now we are watching an occupation, and we are watching the result of your silence, of your misrepresentation of Arabs.
So yeah, that was great. There's a longer video of it, but it's about time that somebody stood up to that demented neocon propagandist, and CNN is also getting it in Ramallah too. People understand that that CNN supplies the background noise for Israel's atrocities. This is Sarah Seidner, who she spread the initial propaganda of 40 beheaded babies, with citing claims by the Israeli Prime Minister's office as confirmation instead of simply claims.
All right. You are genocide supporters. You are not welcome here. Genocide supporters. Fuck CNN. Fuck CNN. Genocide supporters.
All right, you see that people are very angry. They do not like the way in which that CNN has been reporting the story. You hear that, but we're fine. But what you are seeing is the heightened.
So she just kind of robotically continues her report.
The heightened tensions, which is like a stock phrase for every time Israel massacres Palestinians. The heightened tensions in the region. The Palestinians are tense over the fact that they're being butchered and we're whitewashing it. That leads to tensions. Again, another term that implies parity between two sides. So there's tensions between a besieged occupied population and their occupier. And it's hard to say anything is heartening, but any correspondent who whitewashes these atrocities deserves to be confronted about this and told, just given a window into the suffering that they promote and that they cause. Because you're right, they are accomplices, and not that it'll make a difference to their coverage to be called out for it, but at least it's occurring.
And this should happen here. You know, if protest groups are going to go to the site of injustice and mass murder, like the U.S. Capitol, or protest outside the White House, then they should go to CNN headquarters in Washington, or bring buses to Atlanta, where they have their main headquarters. Just as protesters did to the BBC, which has been spreading the usual propaganda. CNN it's just full scale. It's the media wing of the Israeli military at this point. It's just full scale Zionist propaganda.
Well, it helps, and you pointed this out, that they have former AIPAC flunky Wolf Blitzer, literally worked for AIPAC, and
wasn't a flunky; he was an employee.
I mean, he was there. And Dana Bash. She's the daughter of a rabbi, right?
Daughter of a rabbi who married Jeremy Bash, her ex-husband, who was the chief of staff for the CIA and Pentagon, whose own father was a rabbi. Then Jake Tapper, he's referred to by Haaretz as the rabbi of primetime media, educated in a Jewish school, recently did a 92nd Street Y talk in New York with Barry Weiss, the neoconservative propagandist who tried to destroy Palestinian professor Joseph Massad during her time at Columbia University on left-wing anti-Semitism. It's Jake Tapper, the whiny neocon bastion hound, talking about how oppressed Jews in the U.S. are. And now he's just fulminating for a full-on Israeli blitzkrieg and ground assault in Gaza. He cannot contain himself. And they never, ever show any footage from inside Gaza hospitals or anything that would even resemble one of the tens of thousands of atrocities that have occurred in Gaza. They don't spare a second for it on CNN. It's just nonstop interviews with Israeli first responders, reliving October 7th as a new Holocaust again and again and again.
Jake Tapper, speaking to Jake Sullivan the other day, he said that if his child were held hostage right now by Hamas in Gaza, he'd want the U.S. to send in Navy SEALs. It didn't occur to him there's another option if your child is a hostage, is you negotiate for a hostage release, which is what Hamas has been trying to do. There are these Israeli hostages and American hostages inside Gaza. Israel has thousands of Palestinian hostages in their prisons being held without charge or trial. And one of Hamas's goals was to do a prisoner exchange, as had happened before. But Jake Tapper, even in a hypothetical where it's his own kid being held hostage, he claims at least he'd want instead, not for a negotiated release, but for the Navy SEALs to go in and try to free his child. Because again, to these people, all they can see when it comes to Palestinians is violence. That's the only option: violence, force, confrontation.
Well, they want American troops to die for the self-proclaimed Jewish state, which is 5,000 miles away.
Yeah.
I mean, they're Israel lobbyists.
Yeah. Yeah.
Look, I mean, they're there. This is shocking. These are Delta Force troops who are semi-covertly inside Israel. The White House tweeted this photo. In Israel, President Biden met with first responders. These are not first responders. This is Delta Force. Then they deleted the photo an hour later. Why? Because you're not supposed to show the faces of these semi-covert teams. Why is Delta Force, the group that the U.S. sent into Colombia to kill Pablo Escobar, which actually intensified the drug-related violence in that country and spread the drug trade? Why are they there? Do they think they're going to parachute them into the Gaza Strip and rescue Americans and kill the Palestinians like it's some Cold War era Chuck Norris movie so that Jake Tapper can cry basset hound neocon tears? Like, is that what they're thinking? Because it's not going to work out.
Max, since you mentioned something being deleted, this photo of these Delta Force operatives being deleted, here's something else that was deleted. This was from an Associated Press article citing U.S. officials, and these two paragraphs got deleted from the article, but here they are. 4 U.S. officials said American diplomats became increasingly alarmed by comments from their Israeli counterparts regarding their intention to deny water, food, medicine, electricity, and fuel into Gaza, as well as the inevitability of civilian casualties. The officials spoke on condition of anonymity. Members of the Israeli security political establishment told U.S. diplomats that the eradication of Hamas would require methods used in the defeat of the Axis powers in World War II. One official said he and others were told by Israeli counterparts that, quote, a lot of innocent Germans died in World War II and were reminded of Japanese civilian deaths from the U.S. atomic bombs. Israeli officials have publicly made similar comparisons. So this is Israel telling the Biden administration that they plan on adopting World War II level tactics, so which entailed firebombing and even dropping nuclear bombs on cities. And that's the plan, according to these officials. And somehow, for some reason, the Associated Press deleted these 2 paragraphs from that report.
Yeah, so they're talking about Dresden in order to appeal to the Western public. And we've heard this language. These are talking points being spread through the Israeli foreign ministry. We've heard this publicly, that we've heard it from Tzipi Hotovely, the settler fanatic Israeli ambassador to the UK. And we've heard it from Telly Bennett. We'll play some video of him at first, but understand what Dresden was. Dresden was carried out under the watch of Curtis LeMay, bombs away LeMay, head of the U.S. Air Force, with Robert McNamara, defense secretary, I think, employing complex mathematical formulas for the first time to determine how to maximize civilian casualties in order to bring the Axis powers to the negotiating table to surrender. And that was also part of the firebombing of Tokyo, the logic for the firebombing of Tokyo, and ultimately the nuclear bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So some of the worst atrocities ever. And in Dresden, official estimates had like 35,000 to 100,000 dead. Some later estimates had it at 25,000. But this is what Dresden looked like in 1945 in February. Operation Gomorrah is what it was called, I believe. And basically they dropped incendiary bombs on this city, which dated back to, I think, the 16th century, had a lot of wood buildings. just like the paper thin buildings of Tokyo, they set on fire very easily, and the whole place went up in flames. And that is what Israel is openly proposing for the Gaza Strip. And it's already halfway there.
Yeah.
Here's Telly Bennett, who kind of looks like for a lot of women, this might look like a FaceTime call with your abusive ex-husband. But here he is spreading the talking point of a firebombing of Gaza.
And again, you
Absolutely
use the
not.
Palestinian narrative.
You are
They are
incorrect.
responsible, because I can tell you that when the UK,
Absolutely
when Great
not.
Britain was fighting the Nazis during World War II, no one asked what's going on in Dresden. It was the Nazis targeting London, and you targeted Dresden. So
Listen.
shame on you if you go on with that false narrative.
We're not talking about that. And in hindsight, many people have listen. And in hindsight, many people have readdressed that kind of carpet bombing.
Babies. Oh, I see. Now you're Mr. Clean. Shame on you.
Absolutely.
Whoa. Well, yeah. I mean, so there's the Dresden talking point, and we are now at, I think, over 4,000 dead in the Gaza Strip. And the Gaza Health Ministry has announced some 1,400 missing. Many people are still under the rubble. We're hearing from our contacts in Gaza that Gaza City smells like death. This may be from rotting meat. When I was in Shujaiya, the whole area smelled like rotten meat because of all of the butchers, like the butcher shops that have been blown up. But there's also the smell of rotting human carcasses. And you really can't tell the difference when you're there.
And the toll of children, according to the last update I saw from Defense for Children in Palestine, is 1,661 children in Gaza. It's just, and there's so many videos you can go online and just watch if you have.
Yeah, I can't do it anymore.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
I started having, walking nightmares after watching so many of these videos. You scroll through various feeds to get news, and one of them comes up and you have to kind of stop looking. Or if you're Ben Shapiro, it actually stimulates your libido, your weird libido, as you inhale a helium balloon.
And meanwhile, Hamas has just released 2 American captives. They got nothing in return, as far as I can tell, or maybe they did and it's not public, but the point is they did it, which shows that there is a potential, if the U.S. and Israel wanted it, to negotiate for the release of these people. But that's not on the agenda. As the Israeli government has made clear, as the Biden administration has made clear, the plan is to eradicate Gaza, to further ethnically cleanse it, kill, untold numbers of more people. And, Max, I personally was skeptical that Israel was going to launch a ground invasion, because my understanding of them is that they, as you've talked about, they did take a lot of casualties last time they tried in Gaza in 2014. And they're fighting a highly motivated, highly prepared insurgency that's been preparing for this. And they have a cowardly way of fighting war. They have all the weapons of war in the world. They can bomb this defenseless civilian population from the sky, face no resistance. But it looks like at least a ground invasion still is quite possible.
Yeah.
I can't rule it out, but despite what I thought would happen, it seems, Netanyahu was there rallying the troops near the front lines the other day. And that seems to be the plan.
Yeah. There are many reasons why ground invasion is likely, but we have to wonder why it's taken this long for one to actually be declared. And that has to do partly with the Hezbollah effect. Hezbollah has waged 15 operations on Israel's northern frontier. It's taken out several Merkava tanks and other Israeli targets with anti-tank guided missiles, and Israel has not responded, because the consequence of responding would be the evacuation of much of Israel's north, including the occupied Golan, but all the way down to Haifa. Tel Aviv might also come under intense fire. This would be existential. And Hezbollah seemingly warned Israel about a ground invasion. At the same time, Yoav Gallant, the Israeli defense minister, has told Israeli troops that they would see the inside of Gaza soon. And what you have to understand, Israel's military is not, it could be a professional military, but it's not. It is sort of a civilian military force that is the main mechanism for the indoctrination of the Israeli public into the hyper-militarized and nationalistic mentality that prevails, particularly among younger Jewish Israelis. And so basically Gallant is saying, you, Israeli society, will have the opportunity to participate in a blood vengeance rampage against the people of Gaza for what they did to us on October 7th. And the forces amassed at the border, many of them are reservists who are called out of regular jobs to go on this rampage. So there's not necessarily a plan there. I think if they go in, it's definitely going to make it less likely for captives to be recovered because so much of Gaza will be destroyed. There will be thousands and thousands more casualties. And many Israeli troops will die in close quarters combat, and the societal crisis of Israel will deepen. They may have to pull back, as they did in 2014. And in that case, they'll blanket the Gaza Strip with artillery and bombs once again, carry out more massacres, and then they'll have to call it a day if they're not already engaged with Hezbollah. And we also have to note that the allies of Palestinians in the region have already begun attacking U.S. assets. So we don't know how far this could go, but that yesterday, the 4 attacks on U.S. assets was a message to the U.S. about a potential Israeli ground invasion. I see no possibility for this ground invasion of achieving any of its political objectives.
And so where were these other attacks? So there was some missiles fired from Yemen toward Israel, right, that the U.S. intercepted. There also were attacks in Syria on the U.S.-occupied part of Syria, also inside Iraq as well.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, there's continued fighting between Hezbollah and Israel in northern Israel, southern Lebanon. But yeah, I mean, the Hezbollah.
So this is the Syria. This is the attack on the U.S. Military base near the Kanoko oil fields in Syria. Maybe you can give some background on that, why they're there.
Well, Trump said the U.S. is in Syria to take the oil, and they want to take the oil because that's just a continuation of the regime change war against Syria, where after failing to overthrow the government of Bashar al-Assad, the U.S. had turned to basically the traditional tactic of trying to suffocate the population to get them to turn against the government. So that means part of that is stealing their resources, and also not just the oil, but also the wheat that is in the same part of that region that the U.S. is occupying. And we're supposed to just take it as a natural law that U.S. forces have the right to be there, and them coming under attack like this is just par for the course. There's been a couple of times where that's been debated in Congress. We've covered it. There was a resolution sponsored by Matt Gaetz to withdraw U.S. forces, but that failed because both parties, for the most part, are behind this. And it leads to attacks like this. It's not the first time that U.S. forces are being attacked, but obviously at a time when the U.S. is now fueling an open genocide of occupied Palestinians, obviously, inevitably, that's going to lead to more incidents like this. You know, James Mattis, the former chair of the Joint Chiefs, he gave an interview in 2013 where he basically said that Israel and its policies of expansionism, apartheid, were not only making any kind of peaceful resolution impossible, but also endangering U.S. forces. Because he saw this from his time as a CENTCOM commander. He said that this was actually a threat to my own forces. So even from the narrow point of view of the well-being of U.S. troops, this is a continued danger. But the Biden administration, like all administrations, fundamentally committed to the cause of hegemony, and Israel is an arm of that. So therefore, all this has to continue.
What value does Israel provide for the U.S.? It presented itself as America's unsinkable aircraft carrier, but it's very sinkable. We saw it be overrun by guerrilla bands on October 7th. It was humiliated. CNN and none of the networks, they wouldn't show the Israeli military bases being overrun, which were enforcing the siege. Its Gaza divisions were wiped out. They were destroyed. They were weak. They didn't even have people on guard duty. It took hours for reinforcements to arrive. When they did arrive, they apparently killed many hostages, according to at least one, Yasmin Porat, who survived, and saw them gunned down by special forces teams who were just sloppy. How reliable is this partner? Then what interest does it serve for the U.S. to be propping up this endless occupation and siege when it faces so much pressure in the region from those forces that are still willing to stand up for Palestinians, specifically Iran, the Houthi Ansar Allah forces in Yemen, which are its actual government and are a mass grassroots movement, the Shia population of Iraq, which is the majority there, the population of Syria. The U.S. got hit at the Al-Assad air base again yesterday as the price of its support for the occupation of Palestine. And this is footage of the aftermath of a drone attack on the Al-Assad air base. We're hearing, conflicting things. The U.S. said, it intercepted the drones. Nobody was injured. We're hearing 3 people were injured. 1 soldier may have died. Hundreds of soldiers suffered traumatic brain injuries after the U.S. assassinated Qasem Soleimani when Trump ceded to the pressure from Christian Zionist fanatic Mike Pompeo and Benjamin Netanyahu to kill Soleimani. And that really set the stage for October 7th. I mean, this is in many ways Trump's fault.
Yeah, the Abraham Accords trying to sideline Palestinians, which has always been U.S. policy, but this was a way to further formalize that by making these side deals with Gulf monarchies that offered nothing to Palestinians. This is a long tradition in what's called diplomacy in the U.S. Basically, that's what the Camp David Accords were, as you mentioned earlier, basically taking Egypt out of the equation in order to reduce the number of states that could stand up for Palestine. And Trump did that with the so-called Abraham Accords. And Biden was trying to continue that. That's what his, much hyped Saudi Arabia normalization deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel was. And obviously, October 7th interrupted that and killed that for good, at least for a very, very long time. But it all stems from a denial of Palestinians. And, Noam Chomsky said this a while ago. He said, why is it so easy to sideline Palestinians? It's because they have no power. They don't offer anybody anything. They don't have wealth. They don't have resources. From the point of view of all these states, Israel, the U.S., and the monarchies, they're just a hindrance. And this October 7th attack by Hamas was their way of trying to interrupt that. In a way that, again, we don't have to get into this now, but I still would like to understand what their thinking was. And did they think that some of their allies would come to their defense? I don't think this had the blessing of Hezbollah or Iran. I have no inside knowledge, but I somehow doubt it. And now, yeah, it's hard to know the way forward from here, but certainly all these different fronts where the U.S. is either supporting Israel or the U.S. directly has its forces, like in Iraq and Syria, all these are new potential flashpoints.
Yeah. Well, we addressed some of the logic behind the surprise attack on our last stream with a Palestinian journalist, Shadi Abdul Rahman, who just has insights into the thinking of the armed factions. There may be some grievance against Hezbollah or Iran if they don't ultimately intervene. But Hezbollah is already clearly getting active on the northern border, and Israel's not responding in the way we saw it respond in 2006. So we're just going to have to, I hate to say wait and see because it's such a cliche. And it may be that there was no initial support from Iran. We're going to have to see how it shakes out. What is clear, just on a broader historical scale, is that the Zionist movement, as embodied by the Israeli government, sees this as an urgent historical opportunity or even necessity to finish the job. And that's because of the anachronistic and fundamentally destabilizing logic of Zionism, which is a settler colonial movement or settler colonial philosophy. In any settler colonial situation, which are different from, this is different from metropole colonialism, like what we saw the French do in Algeria, where, or the British in India, where the colonists could ultimately go home and they could just pack up and go home and maybe cut some deal after decolonization or post-colonization. The settler colonist sees themselves as having nowhere else to go. And so they either have to somehow make peace or achieve some kind of accommodation with the indigenous group, the Palestinians in this case. One of the founders of the Zionist movement, Chaim Weizmann, had this idea that they could simply buy off the Palestinians because he thought Arabs were fundamentally corrupt. And then you had Zev Jabotinsky, who was the originator or an intellectual author of the Likudnik revisionist Zionism that Benjamin Netanyahu embodies, who conceived this iron wall philosophy, that the only way that we can achieve a place in historic Palestine is through a wall of bayonets and iron and bullets. And that's what Israel has embraced, but it has failed to commit genocide in a total fashion. It has failed to vanquish the natives. They still remain there. We have to remember the original plan for Israel was between the Jordan River and the Nile. That's what the two stripes on the Israeli flag can be seen as symbols of. And that was outlined in the 1913 Jewish National Fund Charter. And so they've been confined actually to a smaller space than originally believed. And Palestinians are holding on to their cantons in the West Bank and to their enclave in the Gaza Strip. And they're still able to make incursions and have their voices heard and to shake the gates. And so now Israel sees that it has a diplomatic and political opportunity to finish the game, because it's not going to make peace. We've seen reports that Netanyahu's diplomats are yelling at foreign diplomats who are calling for a ceasefire, and yelling at them not over that, but yelling at them over their support for the pathetic Oslo Accords. So this is a government that won't make peace, and it needs to finish the game. That means getting Palestinians out of there completely. And here is actually someone who has been in the Israeli government proving my point. I think it's so important that we listen to this, because this is the plan for Gaza. And this is the plan that Biden and Blinken are signing off on and greenlighting. And it's Danny Ayalon.
Told everyone to leave the area. Where were they to go?
Okay. Very, I mean, this is thought out. It's not something that we tell them, go to the beaches, go drown yourselves, God forbid. Not at all. There is a huge expense, almost endless space in the Sinai desert, just on the other side of Gaza. The idea is, and this is not the first time it will be done, the idea is for them to leave over to the open areas where we and the international community will prepare the infrastructure, tent cities with food and with water. You know what? Just like for the refugees of Syria that fled the butchering of Assad a few years ago to Turkey. Turkey received 2 million of them. This is the idea. Again, I say there is a way to receive them all on the other side for temporary time on Sinai. Because what did Hamas turn out
on the other
Gaza?
side? Are we
Gaza,
talking about Rafah? Are you saying the other side that go to Egypt?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And Egypt will have to play ball, because this is human life is at stake. Well, we want to open a humanitarian corridor so they can leave. But if Hamas...
So that who can leave? Citizens? You're saying civilians can leave, but only through the Rafah border, correct?
At this point, yes.
So they can't come...
Where else?
Your country! They can come into Israel!
I'm telling you one more thing I want to say.
I want you to address that point. Don't just smile, sir, respectfully. You're saying you're making a corridor. They can go to Egypt. You're bombing them. You say you want to save them, but they can't come in.
First of all, I'm not smiling. I'm crying in my heart. I'm crying in my heart through.
So it's
That's
pretty
the
clear.
classic. That's the classic Israeli line. You know, we kill, but we cry at the same time, right? Cry then shoot. You know, what's that awful line from Golda Meir? We can forgive the Arabs for killing our children, but we'll never forgive them for making us kill their children.
Right. Right. It's like the bombing of the hospital. Like we can't forgive them for bombing their own hospital and blaming us. But what we're seeing here is the plan. It's the plan for ethnic cleansing on a massive scale like we haven't seen since 1948. 1967 had a lot of ethnic cleansing, but since then they've been unable to push out enough Palestinians. And this is it. They want to, that's what these flyers that they're dropping on Gaza say, go past Wadi Gaza, which is like around the Deir al-Balah city in the middle of Gaza Strip, and keep going to the south towards Rafah. And then we're just going to push you into these tent cities in Sinai, and we're never going to let you back in. And then Israel will take over the north, turn it into like a parking lot or something. And then it'll just wall off more of Gaza and keep pushing them into Egypt gradually, and force the crisis onto the Egyptian government, which depends entirely on the United States through Camp David for its existence and has no ability to push back. And that is genocide. It's going to require genocide. I don't like using that term because it's so overused and so weaponized by our own governments in their phony atrocity regime change propaganda, their R2P propaganda, but that's what we're witnessing here in real time. And that is what is necessary in order to maintain Zionism. So as you have Zionism, it's this destabilizing force in this area. And then the US wants to maintain its imperium in the Middle East. So then the forces of Zionism, the logic of Zionism does not always align with US imperium. That's why we had James Baker, former Secretary of State, to George H.W. Bush, warn of linkage, that US support for Israel could be a driver of radicalization in the Middle East and therefore terror attacks on US targets. Several of the Al-Qaeda operatives involved in 9/11 said they were initially radicalized by attacks by Israel on Lebanon. So that's what's happening right now. And the Israel lobby in Washington and its assets and cutouts in Washington wants to drag the US deeper into this, with Delta forces already inside Israel, operating semi-covertly, exposed by another gaffe by the Biden White House. They want more US forces. There's an entire carrier strike group in the Eastern Mediterranean. There are British warships. There are 2 US aircraft carriers there. They want US soldiers to fight and die for this sectarian state, this settler colonial state that's aiming to commit ethnic cleansing. And it's therefore one of the more dangerous points we've arrived at. I think, Aaron, it might possibly be more dangerous than the Ukraine proxy war, even though Russia is a nuclear power.
Yeah, because at least the Ukraine proxy war so far has been contained to Ukraine and occasional Ukrainian attacks on Russia. But the Biden administration, because it doesn't want to fight Russia itself, because Russia is a nuclear power, has been very careful to make sure that it's only Ukrainians who are being sacrificed in that war, Ukrainians and Russians. This, as you say, extends across the region. And the spillover effect, by the way, of the Ukraine war might also lead to dangers in this region, because inside Syria, you have both US and Russian forces. And the Biden administration, having been humiliated by Russia inside Ukraine so far, because all the predictions we got from the Biden administration, from Putin's regime collapsing to Russia's economy collapsing to Ukraine's counteroffensive routing the Russians, all that has failed. And we know that this is a vengeful regime in Washington, constantly looking to, lash back at people who humiliate it over its own failures. And who knows whether that might help make it easier for the U.S. to try to have a confrontation with Russia inside of Syria. I mean, I don't think that will happen, but these are all possibilities and dangers that are greatly amplified by giving Israel a green light, a full green light, to carry out these massacres in the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, a full green light. So speaking of full green light, let's turn. We now turn to President Joseph Biden, who spoke in the Oval Office last night. It's always frightening when a president speaks from the Oval Office. We had LBJ speak from the Oval Office after the Gulf of Tonkin deception, dragging the U.S. deeper into the abyss of Vietnam. And then George W. Bush to push the WMD deception to take the U.S. into the catastrophe of Iraq. And then Biden on October 19th addressed America to
the video isn't playing. We have to share it. Oh, it looks like Max just froze.
Oh, here we are.
Okay.
I don't know what happened there.
No.
I blame the CIA and the Mossad for that. Well, here's Joe Biden. I'm going to start with the more paranoid part of his speech, where basically he's declaring war on Russia and the Palestinian armed resistance at the same time.
You know, the assault on Israel echoes nearly 20 months of war, tragedy, and brutality inflicted on the people of Ukraine, people that were very badly hurt since Putin launched his all-out invasion. We've not forgotten the mass graves, the bodies found bearing signs of torture, rape used as a weapon by the Russians, and thousands of Ukrainian children forcibly taken into Russia, stolen from their parents.
These were children of Russian ethnicity who were evacuated under his Ukrainian bombing.
Sick. Hamas and Putin represent different threats, but they share this in common. They both want to completely annihilate a neighboring democracy, completely annihilate it. Hamas' stated purpose for existing is the destruction of the state of Israel and the murder of Jewish people. Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people.
So there's the ahistorical framing of Hamas, and he links Hamas to Putin somehow. This is distinctly reminiscent of the most insane incarnations of the neoconservative axis of evil speech that Bush delivered, written by David Frum, who's now kind of a part of the Democratic Party, and seems to be a supporter of Biden. Maybe he had some input here, but it's an axis of evil speech. The U.S. has to fight the Islamic world and Russia. And we're having some internet problems over here. But
TLDR, it was deranged. I mean, it's unbelievable. And you had Janet Yellen, his Treasury Secretary, say, yes, of course we can afford to fight two wars right now. As if that's like somehow supposed to be encouraging that these people are not content with just proxy war against Russia, but now want to open up a new war in the Middle East.
Yeah. Now here's a few other parts I want to highlight. Here, Biden touts Israel is the most moral army.
Look, at the same time, President Netanyahu and I discussed again yesterday the critical need for Israel to operate by the laws of war. That means protecting civilians in combat as best as they can.
Cough.
The people of Gaza urgently need food, water, and medicine. Yesterday, in discussions with the leaders of Israel and Egypt, I secured an agreement for the first shipment of humanitarian assistance from the United Nations to Palestinian civilians in Gaza.
So that shipment has still not gone through. There's protests and pressure at the border in Rafah, which we've already covered. Protesters are basically trying to shake the gates down to break down the prison walls of Gaza to get 20 trucks in. So Biden hasn't done anything. He's done nothing. But that's what I said makes Biden so dangerous, is that if Donald Trump were president and this had happened, I doubt he would be saying anything about humanitarian aid. He wouldn't have issued thoughts and prayers for Muslims as Biden did. Biden goes on to warn of Islamophobia in the U.S. Here it is.
It's also intensified in the wake of recent events that led to the horrific threats and attacks that both shock us and break our hearts. On October 7th, terror attacks have triggered deep scars and terrible memories in the Jewish community. Today, Jewish families worried about being targeted in school, wearing symbols of their faith walking down the street, or going out about their daily lives. And I know many of you in the Muslim American community, the Arab American community, the Palestinian American community, and so many others are outraged and hearty, saying to yourselves, here we go again with Islamophobia and distrust we saw after 9/11.
So Biden right now is facing kind of, this is more Tony Blinken is facing a lot of dissension within the State Department, especially from the Muslim diversity, equity, and inclusion staffers who thought somehow they'd be able to make a difference and are now just basically realizing that they're cogs within a cold, soulless imperial machine drenched in Arab Muslim blood. And so this is kind of a sop, not only to Muslims who might vote Democrat in Michigan, a key swing state, but also within the Biden administration who are bridling at this unsheathed, unfettered, shameless support for Israel's ethnic cleansing and blitzkrieg on the Gaza Strip. And that's what, again, makes Biden dangerous, is Trump would have never done this. It would have been mask off U.S. imperialism, Zionism, but Biden is sending Israel the same amount of weapons that Trump would have, but with a appeal to the goodness of America and to respect Muslim life. It's very insidious. And then he offers another incentive or reason why America must support this bill that he's submitting to Congress to fund Ukraine and Israel simultaneously. And it is the same thing that Trump has said. For example, in his meeting with Mohammed bin Salman, Donald Trump held up placards showing how Saudi arms sales to Saudi created jobs in the U.S. And he was described as crude and condemned. But here's Biden saying it in a much more democratic way.
Ukrainian equipment sitting in our stockpiles. And when we use the money allocated by Congress, we use it to replenish our own stores, our own stockpiles with new equipment. Equipment that defends America and is made in America. Patriot missiles for air defense batteries, made in Arizona. Artillery shells manufactured in 12 states across the country, in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Texas, and so much more.
So much more. We're job creators.
Just as in World War II, today patriotic American workers are building the arsenal of democracy.
So he cites FDR on the arsenal of democracy, rattles off a few swing states where he's creating jobs by dropping roofs on the heads of families in Gaza, and weaponizes the imagery that he spins of dead children in Israel in order to compel total consensus for continued arming of the Ukrainian counteroffensive in the wake of, to continue arming the Ukraine proxy war in the wake of a completely failed Ukrainian counteroffensive. So what were your thoughts on the speech, Aaron?
Well, he sounds exactly like Mitch McConnell, because Mitch McConnell in recent weeks has been saying the exact same thing about how the Ukraine proxy war is being used to rebuild our industrial base, as if somehow like the country is being rejuvenated because we're shipping off weapons to Ukraine and now Israel to kill civilians. Max, both of us live in the U.S. Where homelessness is rampant, poverty is high, infrastructure is crumbling. This isn't improving. I mean, even if you ignore the human toll that it's causing abroad, this isn't improving the country at all. It's just going to the coffers of the usual war profiteers. But it shows how on foreign policy, there's no difference between Biden and Mitch McConnell, his supposed opponents. They're in perfect lockstep to the point where they're now using the same rhetoric. And by the way, invoking World War II is that's a positive thing. So is that then trying to suggest that we're now in World War III? That if we're following the model of a world war, are we now in a world war again? Is that what Biden wants? This administration is, I didn't think I could see a worse administration than the Bush administration, the George W. Bush administration. But at least under George W. Bush, there was some congressional opposition sometimes. There was an anti-war contingent inside Congress. Now there's none. You have on Gaza, thankfully, some progressive lawmakers waking up, but I don't think it's more than a dozen congressional progressives so far who've signed on to this resolution calling for a ceasefire. So this administration is unhinged. They think not only it's wise to fight a proxy war against a nuclear armed power, but now it's wise to give a green light for this Israeli massacre in Gaza and all the human carnage that will continue to cause, not just in Gaza, but possibly elsewhere. And what's happening? How are progressives going to respond to this? Because this measure includes tens of billions of dollars for their pet project, the Ukraine proxy war, which so far every progressive has gotten behind. Are they now finally going to stand up to Biden after applauding him for nearly 2 years now on Ukraine? People like Matt Duss, who bent over backwards to praise Joe Biden for his responsible foreign policy. These people who have paid lip service to Palestinian human rights, how are they going to react now? And certainly they put themselves in a big disadvantage by praising Biden to date and talking about what a great leader he is. And that makes it all the more difficult for them now to oppose him because they've been on board with his policies so far. And of course, this is going to extend to Israel because the Ukraine proxy war, as we've been pointing out, is a fundamentally neocon endeavor. And by the way, that also meant undermining their own opposition to Trump when he was a fanatically pro-Israel president. Because recall, the only documented case of collusion that was unearthed during Russiagate between Trump and a foreign power was not between Trump and Russia, but between Trump and Israel, when the Trump transition team tried to sabotage a UN resolution that Obama let pass on his way out, mildly criticizing Israeli settlements. And then Trump going on to move the embassy to Jerusalem, to kill Soleimani, to recognize Israel's annexation of the Golan Heights of Syrian territory. Democrats ignored all of that collusion because they were so fixated on their Russiagate collusion conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
What are they going to do? What are they going to do now that all this is reaching its logical conclusion?
With Russiagate, Aaron, we saw political realignment and the real consolidation of a uniparty. The George W. Bush conservatives and neoconservatives united with the mainstream Democratic Party, which is led by one of the last true Cold War Democrats who rose during the Cold War, Joe Biden, in support of fighting Russia, China, and the Islamic world simultaneously. That's their foreign policy. It's completely ideological. It has very little to do with U.S. national interest. And at home, they have a financialized economy beset with inflation where people are struggling just to buy groceries. And one of the few productive industries is the arms industry. So we hear the same messaging from Biden that we hear from Mitch McConnell on the need to create jobs by extending these wars for as long as possible. And of course, Biden, he wasn't actually going to be an FDR at home. Biden suggests he would veto Medicare for all over its price tag. This is in March 2020. At the same time, Biden says we can fight two wars at the same time because you're going to pay for it. Your tax dollars are going to go to two pointless, completely unavoidable, and wars that cause humanitarian catastrophe with no end to fuel jobs, and he won't give you Medicare. So we're not looking at the Democratic Party. We're looking at the uniparty here in action. That's who will approve this bill, which is an ask for $103 billion for two wars. Both being fought by foreign countries with their own interests, who happen to be ultra-nationalist countries that are not democracies. Israel is a Herrenvolk ethno-democracy or an ethnocracy wrapped inside a military dictatorship. And Ukraine and its president, Vladimir Zelensky, have said that they're modeling the future of their country off of Israel. He's called for a big Israel as he bans all opposition parties, bans opposition media, and jails all critics and opposition. So where are the values actually here? There are no, it's all an illusion. And I think I'm hearing from, Arabs and Muslims who voted for Biden because, Trump was so Islamophobic, that they will never vote for Biden again. Well, that's not enough. You have to organize as a bloc. Those of you who want to send a message to Biden from the left have to organize as a bloc and write someone in if you do not organize around a candidate like Cornel West, who's just been weird and kind of pathetic. I can go into that in a second. Write in a watermelon. Write in a watermelon, because the watermelon has become the symbol of the Palestinian flag, as countries like Germany actually ban the display of the Palestinian flag, and Israel bans Palestinian citizens from displaying the Palestinian flag. They have adopted the watermelon as the symbol of Palestine. So write in a watermelon, but do something to show that the Democrats that there will be a price for this foreign policy and this support for apartheid. Don't just shrink away.
Yeah, the progressives who've already endorsed Biden, like Bernie and AOC, I'm sure there are others. Are they going to keep endorsing this guy after what he's just done, giving a green light to Israel to massacre Palestinian civilians, to level Gaza, to destroy it, to team with the most fanatic neocons in the Republican Party in support of the Israeli government? The minimum they can do, the minimum is rescind those endorsements. The minimum they can do. I mean, they never should have endorsed them, I think, to begin with. I mean, what has he done to deserve it from a progressive point of view? But that's beside the point now. The minimum they can do is rescind their endorsement. But I don't expect anything from that contingent based on what we've seen so far.
Everybody just forgets, it's like in a year, this will all be forgotten somehow.
Yeah.
And the media will create some hysteria around Trump, and everyone will forget what just took place in Gaza. This was totally avoidable. I mean, 2 captives were released today because some diplomacy took place. The U.S. could have the U.S. could have gotten more out if it wanted it. The Biden administration could have gotten the captives out if they wanted to, but it's personal for them. Tony Blinken said he's going to Israel as a Jew. He said his support for Israel is inherited from his family. His grandfather was an Israel lobbyist, one of the earliest Israel lobbyists. They're not thinking in terms of diplomacy or saving lives. They're passionate. So they need to pay a price at the ballot box, and they need to know that they paid a price. The pundits need to be saying in 2024, there's been a backlash against Biden for his genocidal policy toward Palestine and his unsheathed neoconservative imperialist policy toward Russia and China. That would be a great achievement, because it would mean at least one of the parties would know that there's some pressure on their left flank. But yeah, I mean, this is all a fantasy, Aaron. I don't see any elected official actually taking action.
No. And I'm going to have to log off soon, but the last
point. Well, that's all I have to say.
Well, the last point I want to make is just to underscore how avoidable all this was. There was a time not too long ago when even the former chief of the Mossad, Israeli intelligence, Ephraim Halevi, among many Israeli voices, this is from 2017, was saying it's time for Israel to talk to Hamas. And what they recognized was that Hamas wanted legitimacy and did not want the status quo, and that Hamas was changing its rhetoric. It had updated its charter, and the charter itself is irrelevant. It was written at a time of the first Intifada when Gaza was being brutalized, and some people in refugee camps wrote up a charter saying the Israeli state has to be wiped out. It's irrelevant. The Likud party, which is Benjamin Netanyahu's party, has a just as extreme charter saying that there'll never be a Palestinian state. But Hamas was changing. Hamas was accepting the international consensus of a 2-state solution, saying we'll accept a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza. But Israel and the U.S. decided that Hamas can never be spoken to, and instead they turned to this tacit policy of leaving Hamas in power without making any steps to break the siege, to ease the suffering of normal Palestinians. And that's why a few years later, once Hamas dropped the idea of accepting even a Palestinian state in the 22% of historic Palestine, which is a huge compromise, Netanyahu returned to the policy, the traditional U.S. policy of propping up Hamas, which they recognized from the start would be a way to undermine secular Palestinian nationalism based in the West Bank. So that's just one window into how all this was avoided. Israel, with U.S. backing, blocked any opportunity to de-escalation, to some sort of peaceful resolution. And now we're in the situation we're in now. And rather than stepping back from that, Biden gives Israel a full green light to proceed to just wipe out Gaza. That's the plan right now. That's what we're witnessing right now in real time.
And it's not really a plan. We'll see that in coming weeks. There was no plan, just like Iraq. And let's not let them forget this. If you can't find someone to vote for in 2024, write in a watermelon. That's where I'm at right now. They need to know that we drew the line here. And there will be more protests this week, I'm sure. They're not hard to find, but make your voice heard. Don't let this fade away. This assault, I think, is going to continue for weeks and weeks of agony. And honestly, like I had a lot of photos of suffering people inside the Gaza Strip and video teed up, and I just can't watch it myself. I just can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
But the corporate media journalists need to be confronted with it because they refuse to show it. They're erasing them. They're silencing them. So that's why we're here. Thank you for watching, obviously. But like this stream, YouTube is censoring the crap out of us. They're suppressing us. They're demonetizing us. I'm sure this one will be demonetized. So like the stream, subscribe. I hear some people are being unsubscribed without their own knowledge. So continue to subscribe. And you know how to support us. That supports our whole team. And we will be back next week. We'll keep following this. We'll keep following this as intensely as we possibly can. And we also did send someone we sent Liam Cosgrove, or he sent himself to the State Department today, but obviously he didn't get called on. But we'll be out in the field reporting. We might even be able to get someone on the ground. So stay tuned. Anything else you want to add, Aaron?
Thanks everybody for joining us. And, we're all in this together.
All right. Thank you, Aaron.
Peace.
Peace, everybody.